9 on 11.
This is the CBS Sunday Night News. Terrence Smith sitting in tonight for Bill Plant. Good evening. FBI Director William Sessions said today he is optimistic about eventually discovering who planted the bomb aboard Pan Am Flight 103. And he welcomed the reported offer of help from PLO Chief Yasser Arafat. In Scotland, the painstaking search of the crash site continues, as Tom Fenton reports.
One of the major missing parts of the airliner has been found, a piece of the tail section. And a controversy has been stirred up by the disclosure that Boeing used depleted uranium in the tail. The Boeing company acknowledges that in early model 747s, depleted uranium that is very slightly radioactive was used as a counterweight in the tail section. Boeing says no radioactivity could have been released in this crash unless the plane had burned for a long time in a very hot fire. The police and military gave up their New Year's Day holiday to continue the grim hunt for more bodies and wreckage. One more body was found today, bringing the total to 242. So far, only 49 have been identified and released to relatives. There has been some criticism that the local Scottish police are moving too slowly. The police have responded by pointing out that by moving too fast, they might miss some scrap of evidence that could help bring the perpetrators to justice. They are searching an area larger than the city of Philadelphia. Life in Lockerbie is beginning to return to normal, but the town will bear for a long time the scars of the worst aviation disaster in British history. A large memorial service is planned on Wednesday. In addition to townspeople and relatives of those who died in the crash, 100 Pan Am employees from around the world are expected to attend. Tom Fenton, CBS News, London.
In Afghanistan, the Soviet-backed government began a ceasefire today, but the U.S.-backed Muslim rebels rejected it as meaningless, and the fighting continues. Bert Quint reports from Moscow.
Word from the Kremlin as the new year begins is that the Afghan problem is close to a solution. That follows announcements in Kabul and Moscow that Afghan and Soviet troops have declared a ceasefire effective today. But there's little likelihood that President Najib's call for an end to the fighting will be heeded by all the forces battling his regime, especially the hardcore Islamic Mujahideen. And there's been particularly heavy fighting recently, including New Year's Eve, with attacks on rebel positions by Soviet and Afghan forces, and, according to the Soviets, clashes between rival rebel groups. That apparently won't stop the Soviet army from completing its withdrawal by the target date of February 15th. Meanwhile, the Soviets are trying to negotiate a settlement that would leave a political framework that would prevent all-out civil war once Moscow's men have left the field and keep an anti-Russian regime from taking over. As for the Soviets, the outlook is for a political as well as a military defeat in Afghanistan. Whoever ends up in charge after the withdrawal isn't likely to feel very brotherly toward the nation of infidels that occupied their country. So the Kremlin's assessment that a solution is near may be merely wishful thinking. Bert Quint, CBS News, Moscow.
Still ahead on the CBS Sunday Night News, with the new Congress about to convene in Washington, we'll sample some of the hundreds of state laws that took effect this New Year's Day.
I woke up with this killer pressure from a sinus cold.
Sinus cold.
Pain.
Pressure. Ingestion.
Couldn't breathe.
Pain. Ingestion. Pressure.
The pain was awful.
Ingestion. Pressure.
I took new maximum strength Dristan. I'm here.
Discover new maximum strength Dristan. It combines two strong medicines to drain sinus cavities, unclog congestion, to relieve pressure and pain.
And it won't make you drowsy.
New maximum strength Dristan. Strong medicine for tough sinus colds.
New Arm & Hammer Dental Care is the baking soda toothpaste.
A survey shows 2 out of 3 dentists and hygienists recommend baking soda for healthier teeth and gums.
My mouth feels minty fresh.
And clean.
New Arm & Hammer Dental Care for healthier teeth and gums.
All this great food.
It's for the party. And a fresh box of Arm & Hammer baking soda keeps everything fresh.
Another box in the freezer?
Keeps ice cream from tasting funny. And the calendar reminds us to change every 3 months. Isn't it time for a fresh box?
Washington is preparing this week for a new year and a new administration. George Bush, as president of the Senate, will officially account the Electoral College votes. He should be happy with the results. and the 101st Congress convenes for the first time. Ron Allen reports.
When the new Congress convenes on Tuesday, the 33 new members of the House and 11 freshman senators, along with their colleagues, will soon be measured by how they handle the nation's multi-billion-dollar deficit.
Democrats, with their new Senate leader, George Mitchell, out in front, are looking to President-elect George Bush's lips for his no new tax increase solutions.
We have to wait and see what President-elect Bush proposes. Obviously, if we can deal with the deficit effectively and meaningfully without taxes, we'd all be supportive of that.
And skepticism is already surfacing among some Republicans. For example, today, House Minority Leader Bob Michael said spending cuts might not be enough to meet the deficit reduction targets unless revenues, that means taxes, are increased as well.
Down the road a piece, that may be part of the answer.
However, before facing the serious budget issue, the members of the 101st Congress will find their own paychecks may be one of the first orders of business, because President Reagan is expected to propose pay raises for top federal officials before he leaves office.
Much of what happens here on the Hill will depend on how successful the Bush administration is in pushing its own agenda. Democrats still maintain sizable majorities in both the House and Senate. Despite losing the presidential election, they expect to win their share of victories here. Ron Allen, CBS News, Capitol Hill.
The National Football League playoffs are down to the final 4 teams. San Francisco will play Chicago, Buffalo will play Cincinnati in next week's conference championships. The winners go on to the Super Bowl. New Year's Day is traditionally the effective date for new laws, and this year there is a bumper crop that includes the substantive and the not-so-serious. The sweeping U.S.-Canada trade agreement takes effect, reducing tariffs between the world's 2 largest trading partners. In Maryland, most handguns are banned under a new law that withstood a major repeal campaign by the gun lobby. Several states increased penalties for drunk driving, while Little Rock, Arkansas makes history by permitting the sale of mixed drinks on Sunday for the first time. Prisoners will begin to enjoy all the comforts of home at home. That's where some nonviolent convicts in California and Illinois may serve their sentences, monitored electronically. Rhode Island will require prostitutes, convicts, and drug users to be tested for AIDS when they are arrested. Gasoline taxes rise a penny in South Carolina, 2 cents in Iowa and Oregon. In Connecticut, the state may withhold child support and alimony payments from lottery winnings and then pass them along to the beneficiaries. In California alone, more than 1,600 new laws and initiatives take effect. Cigarette taxes are tripled to 35 cents a pack, and realistic toy guns are banned. There's also relief for the squeamish. Students who shrink at the prospect of dissecting a frog may choose another science project. And as of today, California has not 1 but 2 officially designated state dances: the square dance and something called the West Coast Swing. Never heard of it? It's also known as the jitterbug. Stretching ahead of us, the departed of 1988 are still fresh in our memories, as we hear from Susan Spencer.
In Albany, New York this weekend, another funeral for one of the passengers of ill-fated Pan Am Flight 103. 16-year-old Melina Hudson was buried. A time to mourn and to remember. Looking back at the past year, we remember so many remarkable friends.
They will be missed. Bill Plant will be along with more news in just a moment.
course you knew that. But perhaps over the past 8 weeks, it hasn't been very obvious.
Since the election, as attention has shifted to George Bush, the White House staff, insisting that Mr. Reagan is not a lame duck, has done its best to keep him in the limelight. But now, in the twilight zone of the last 3 weeks, the president's advisors wish they could declare him a lame duck. The reason? This is the time of enormous pressure for presidential pardons. That rare moment every 4 or 8 years when an outgoing president can act on potentially unpopular measures at no political cost. Friends of Oliver North and John Poindexter, including some of Mr. Reagan's longtime right-wing supporters, want them pardoned before they go to trial, as Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon. But pardons are usually sought by people who have already been convicted and punished, because they imply forgiveness and they can restore civil rights. Industrialist Armand Hammer wants a pardon. He made illegal campaign contributions to Richard Nixon in 1972. So did New York Yankees owner George Steinbrenner, and he too wants a pardon. Heiress Patty Hearst, convicted of armed robbery when she was the captive of a radical group in the 70s, had her sentence commuted by President Carter. Now she seeks a full pardon. Korean religious leader Sun Myung Moon did time for tax fraud and obstruction of justice. He too is lobbying hard for a pardon through a high-powered Washington attorney. So President Reagan, with advice from the Justice Department, will probably act on these and dozens of other requests for clemency by January 20th. A sparse record of Reagan pardons over the past 8 years, though, doesn't offer much encouragement. But some of the president's friends are hoping that he'll come through for them in his final days. Mr. Reagan's aides, however, say, don't bet the ranch on it. That's the CBS Sunday Night News. I'm Bill Plant. A very happy New Year to you, and good night.
This is CBS. On a special edition.